Hey folks, welcome to Unit 5, Lesson 3, I Do. This is about cause and effect, and in particular, researching an answer. So our learning goals for today are to be able to say that you can research and cite evidence to answer an academic question, and I can construct an informative text to examine a topic. So let's look at that idea of research. What is research? So research is simply finding information to answer a question. That's all it means, right? So we do this all the time. Anytime we're Googling something to find the answer, we're researching. But academic research, right? Because remember, we're trying to answer an academic question, right? Academic research has some steps, and we're going to look at those steps. The first step is to ask the question. Oftentimes we give you a question, we call it a prompt, right? So we've given you the question for your research, but sometimes we just give you a topic, right? So if I just give you the topic, Armenia and Azerbaijan conflict, then you have to come up with the question. So what's a question we might be able to ask about the Armenian Azerbaijan conflict? Alright, so the question, I want you to think about your question, because questions come in many forms, right? So it might be, how many people voted, right? That's what we call a right there question. It's simple, it's easy to answer, quick to look up, right? Then there's also search and think questions. Why is Russia invested in this region's conflict, right? That's a much deeper question. A search and think question requires us to read several different things, maybe in one article, maybe in multiple articles, to find the answer. Finally, we have author and you questions. This is where you have to put your ideas and knowledge together with the writing or the reading to figure out the answer. So like, what bias do you think the author has in this writing? So you have to put your knowledge about bias along with what you read in the writing, right, to figure out the answer to this question. So it's a much more complicated question. So think about your question that you just came up with. Was it a right there question, a search and think question, or an author and you question? Okay, so when we're thinking of research questions, we want to try and be more complicated. So we want to make sure we're trying to do at least search and think questions and maybe some author and you questions. So let's look at this question. How many people are affected by the Armenian and Azerbaijan conflict? Now this might appear like a simple question, but when you actually start to research it, you find out that it's not a straightforward answer. You kind of have to look at different pieces of information and to figure it out. So if this is our question, alright, so our next step is to find a source. Now, finding a source is as easy as Googling the question, right? But you have to Google it the right way, because literally anywhere you get information is a source. Dictionary, encyclopedia, Apparent Guardian, and some random blog on the internet. All of those things are sources, right? So let's just Google this question real quick. So if I put that in, you can see that I get 3 million results. And then a lot of them are sort of like websites I maybe not have heard of. Armenia Weekly, Al Monitor, Al Jazeera. All of those things are sort of, one-sided news sources. So what we want to do, first of all, and you notice I'm on the news one. So when you first type it in, you're going to be on all. And look at that, 28.5 million results. That's just way too many. We want to narrow it down. We know that we have a good question when we narrow it down. But also when you Google your question, right, you want to look at what is the main idea here? What is the big piece of information? And that's going to be the Armenian and Azerbaijan conflict. So if I just Google that, right, I only get 6,000 results, and so that's much narrower, especially once I go to news, right? And so I'm going to kind of look through these, and you might have to read through lots of different articles and reading whole articles to find your answer. Earlier when I did this, I found this article. I really like this article. It's easy for me to read. It has numbers right off the bat here for me. And so it really seems to understand the article or the information I'm looking for. It's relatively recent, it's only about a month old. So now I have to do my next step, which is evaluate the source. So what does that word evaluate mean? Right, so it sort of means to like judge the source for how truthful it is, or how valid it is, or how strong it is, right? And how do we do that? Well, we're looking for its credibility, right? We're looking for its credibility. So if something is credible, that means that like it's more full of truth, right? So credible sources, first of all, they're news sources, so they come from places like the AP, the NPR, and C-SPAN. They have experts and evidence, so it has quotes from experts. It provides its own proof, right? And it attempts to be free from bias, right? The more free from bias, the more credible it is. So it gives facts more than opinions. It uses figures and statistics that make sense, and it doesn't use emotional language. We can also check the credibility of a source against a chart like this, right? So the higher we are on this chart, right, the more original and fact-based it is. Down here is more like lies and what we might call like propaganda, which is sort of like just information meant to persuade you. It's not necessarily truthful information, right? So then it becomes like selective and incomplete, and then it's mostly opinion-based, and then an analysis. And analysis is sort of like, remember, that's the breaking down, more complex analysis, fact reporting, original fact reporting, right? So the higher up on this chart we are, the better. Now this chart also tells us political bias. Is it left-leaning or right-leaning, right? So really, we're looking for things that are inside this green box, but really anything around here is going to be fine, right? As far as we're concerned. Now, these are going to be more conservative, and these are going to be less conservative, basically what that means, right? Now, our source right here, BBC News, right? You can find that right in the middle of this box. So that's a perfect source. That's a great source as far as like unbiased, mostly facts are going to be, right? So now that I've evaluated my source, I know it's a good source, I have to find the answer, right? And I have to find the answer by reading through a lot of this, right? And once I find it, I really liked this. I've read through this whole article, but I really like this piece of information. So, I'm going to copy that piece of information, because when I look through this, there's a lot more like, so 70,000 people are displaced in the latest escalation, officials say, right? The now fragile ceasefire. So there's a lot of different like bits of information throughout this, but this is the piece that I liked the best, because it was the sort of the heaviest piece of information. It's about the deaths in the region, and I thought that was a really key, important piece of information, because it's really sad what's going on, and so we want a piece of information that impacts people a lot, right? So I'm going to put that right here. So this is where we're going to put our races response, remember? And so I put that information here. You'll notice I also copied the article title. I also copied where it came from and when it was published, because we're going to use all of that to cite our evidence, right? Just like we did in the last unit, we're going to cite our evidence here too. So if I'm going to do the races model, right, the first step is to recite the questions. So, the number of people affected by the Armenian and Azerbaijan conflict is, and then I know it's like 500 people. We also read in the article that thousands are displaced. And so, I have to answer the question. I took my answer from here. Is in the, hundreds to thousands, right? Hundreds to thousands. Okay. Then I'm going to say according to, and then I'm going to cite my evidence, a BBC News article from October 12th, right? And then I'm going to copy my piece of evidence from the article right there, boom, right? And then I can explain that. So this shows us that hundreds have died. Like many thousands more have been displaced or affected by those deaths, right? So I'm explaining my evidence. This is why the Armenian and Azerbaijan conflict, and now I'm just going to summarize it, has had a devastating effect on the region's people, right? It's helpful if I spelled correctly while typing. That's why we always are able to, check our spelling, want to edit. So now we have our races, RACES, response. Okay? And so that's what you're going to be doing in your you-do, and you're going to practice some of these skills in your we-do. Speaking of practice, let's look at a couple of sources, and let's see if you can choose which one's the most credible, right? So which one of these two sources is the most credible? This one comes from the AP. This one comes from Al Jazeera. This one says, fighting over the Nagorno-Karabakh region drags on into 6th week. This one says, Azerbaijan says Armenia used cluster bombs and deadly Barda attack, right? So let's look at these two, and which one do you think is most credible? Let's look at this chart and make a decision. Right. So if you chose this side, you did absolutely right, because the AP here, right, it's listed right here at the very top. It is one of the best sources for information, right? They do straight facts. It's completely unbiased. It is one of the best sources, right? You can also might have said something like this one is more one-sided because it's only talking about the Azerbaijan side, where this one talks about just the fighting in the region in general, right? And so this one is a much more credible source. That's kind of what we're going to do when we judge sources. Okay, so great job here. We're going to move on to Unit 5, Lesson 3, we do. All right, awesome job.